He was somewhat progressive on slavery as a young man, as much as a young slave owner could be in the Virginia of his time. His whole life was made possible by slavery. His first memory was being handed on a pillow to a slave to be taken on a horseback ride. His last hours were spent with a slave being the only person who understood what he was signaling with his eyes on his deathbed, and the slave adjusts the pillow. So from pillow to pillow, Thomas Jefferson's life was made possible by slavery. Early on, he had a more Enlightenment-driven view of the institution. He made a natural law argument in a court case as a lawyer, meaning that all men are created equal. All men are born free. That phrase appears in an early legal brief. In a case he lost. He attempted in the Virginia House of Burgesses to pass an emancipation, a stepped, phased emancipation piece of legislation, and it failed. Thomas Jefferson fundamentally was a politician. He was someone who put together coalitions in the moment to solve problems provisionally, because that's what politics is about.
A pragmatist.
He was a total pragmatist. We often think of him as a man of ideas, as a man of, and that's how, believe me, that's how he wanted us to talk about him. He wanted us, as we know from his tombstone, to think of him as the author of the Declaration of Independence, the author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Liberty, and the founder of the University of Virginia. That's wonderful. Those are important things. From 1769 until 1809, for 40 years, he was more or less constantly in public office or thinking about public office. And the political Jefferson is, I think, essential to understanding his views on slavery, which were ideal in a way. He had a vision of emancipation, of repatriation. He thought that slavery was a moral wrong, but as a politician, that was as an idealist, as a politician, he could not see how he could possibly pass that, make that happen in the America of the 18th and early 19th centuries. And so he did something that's very uncharacteristic for Thomas Jefferson, which is that he gave up.
What made him give up?
Defeat. He could not find a way to put together a majority to achieve any progressive movement on slavery. And we also have to remember, very much a creature of his time. You know, we can't rip these people out of context and plop them down in 2012, 2013 and expect them to be us. His view was that at best there could be an emancipation, but then there would be repatriation, there would be colonization. African American slaves would leave the United States. He did not foresee a biracial integrated society. One of the many ironies of his life, because he created a biracial society at Monticello. But Thomas Jefferson is nothing if not rich in irony. And I think that's driven by this tension between what was ideal and what was possible. And almost always, he chose what was possible because he was, in fact, a man in the arena. He was not an airy philosopher. As often as he could seem to be airily philosophical, in point of fact, he was a hard-headed political realist.
What would have happened? What did happen when he attempted to insert language in documents or attempt to pass anti-slavery legislation?
Well, look at the Declaration of Independence. His harshest passages about slavery were taken out by the floor, by the lawmakers on the floor of the Continental Congress. John Adams said he wasn't surprised. He wrote very passionately about slavery and the slave trade and how evil it was in the first draft of the Declaration that went to the floor in Carpenter's Hall in July of 1776.
Essentially, what did he put in that first draft?
He said that the slave trade was immoral and that he had, the king had protected it, and later thought as well that one of the reasons that had gotten excised was not only because of Southern slave owners, but because in New England there had been a number of people who had made a good bit of money carrying slaves to the New World.
Did Jefferson insert the anti-slavery language in the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, knowing that it would be excised?
No, I don't think so. I think that I think it was a document that was a burst of creativity. It was, as he put it, not an attempt to be original, but to be an expression of the American mind. Lovely phrase, expression of the American mind at that time. And he was thinking like a lawyer, which he also was. What are the points of indictment? What are the points of contention? And to his mind, slavery was one that belonged very much to the old world, and that if in fact a new order of things was to begin, as the national motto was to say, he was on a subcommittee, greatest subcommittee ever, by the way, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, they could solve anything. So if a new order of things was in fact to begin, it would have to begin without slavery. And it's one of those wonderful phrases. The phrases on the Jefferson Memorial about he trembles because he knows that God is just. Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than that these people should be free. All of that's wonderful. It all sounds terrific. But in point of fact, because he could not see a political way forward to effect emancipation and recolonization, he simply stopped. But in the middle of the 1780s, he was still pushing the American government, such as it was at that time. It was a very weak central government. That's why we had the Constitutional Convention. That's why we had the new federal government. He was still pushing to keep slavery from being expanded into new territories. And he kept losing. And he didn't like to lose. And I think that it's not a great deal more complicated than that. His economic life, his cultural life, were all totally intertwined with, supported by, made possible by slavery. There's no question. But though he philosophically understood that the right thing to do was to move from a slave society to a free society, he could not find a path forward.